In this section, Loafing questions why God created history, why he risked it. Why this convoluted one step forward, three steps back system. Why evolution? Why this messy process? Right? He drops us in with the priestly writers in Genesis 1, right? And in the story of Genesis 1, the first creation story, we have the writer saying 6 times God saw that it was good. God made the world good. And then after everything was created, he said, indeed it was very good, right? Now, fast forward to Genesis 6, and what's God saying? God's saying something quite different. He's saying, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence, and God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, right? So it's not the same. There's a change, right? He created it good, but now it's corrupted, right? Filled with violence. Everyone is looking out for themselves and not seeing their neighbor as another self. What happened? So the priest writer P didn't really talk about what happened. They kind of didn't need to, because the Yahwist writers J, the J source, they had already kind of talked about that. Their story, and P adapted the J story in second and third book, second and third chapters of Genesis. There's some P in there too. P did some editing on it. So it's not like you have a pure J story in Genesis 2 to 4. But it is mostly the earlier, what most scholars think is the earlier story from the pre-Babylonian exile period. This story of the fall and this creation story in the Garden of Eden before it, and Cain and Abel. Loafing includes chapter 2 to 4 as the full story of how the earth got from very good, which it is in Genesis chapter 2 in the creation story. It's quite nice. It's a paradise. To what it got to before the flood, right? Corrupt, maybe the way it kind of is now, right? The way the writers say, well, this isn't, God created the earth himself very good, but the world we're living in, it's not that good. What's going on? So Loafing points out, this is simple. Shouldn't be understood as chronological, right? So the narrative of paradise and the fall, to which Cain's murder of his brother also belongs, is not about an original historical condition that human beings have lost, and certainly not about a golden age at the dawn of history. On the basis of Israel's experience, it develops some fundamental statements about the human situation, right? So he says it's about what's going on now. It's about what it means to be a human being, right? For the original audience of P and J, but also for us, and also for human beings throughout history. It's it explains the human condition. But Loafing doesn't think Genesis 2 to 4 is telling us about how it was in the beginning, maybe in some kind of pre-human species, or in a kind of primordial blissful time. No, he says it's telling us about what humans can be, right? It's about our potential, right? So it's what we could be, and what we have become. They don't quite match up, right? So if you look at Genesis 2, we could be like that. We could be intimate with the earth, right? With animals, right? With each other, and with God, right? You have God coming just to hang out with the Adam and Eve in the cool part of the day, right? Adam and Eve are again naked and unashamed. So it's about how it could be now, not about what it was. And that eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that event that kind of brought it started the corruption to get it to the place we are now, in a certain symbolic sense, is not trusting in the goodness of God. Right? It's not any specific sin, but it's not trusting that God is good. Right? We saw birds making the same point. You know, and you have to wonder, like, why didn't they just wait and talk to God about it? You know, they really seem to think like, yeah, God was really trying to hide something from them. It's a basic mistrust. So on page 16, Loafing puts this very articulately and almost poetically here. Right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, trusting God's commandment not to eat from it, that's just trust in the goodness of God. Right? He must have had some reason he told us that. Right? Now again, they could have just went and asked him about it. Like, hey, why'd you tell us that? It's not, Loafing's not trying to, if you read this section, he says he's not trying to say that we're not supposed to think, we're not supposed to question. Right? But there is trust that would even lead one to ask the question. Right? To think about it takes a certain amount of trust. So then we see in the post eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the fall, you see what happens. You know, sin breaks community, right? This basic mistrust of God is also a mistrust of one another, and you see, what happens immediately. They just blame each other, right? I mean, it's almost comical the way Adam's like, well, it's the woman, and you put her here, It's the opposite of community and intimacy. Sin destroys community and intimacy. So if you really want to see, where it's going, where the sin goes, you see the story of Cain and Abel, right? So it makes it clear, Cain kills his brother, right? Why? His brother is no longer his friend, his companion, someone that he trusts. It's not really his brother, in the full sense of the word. He's now his competition. So Loafing puts in another poetic statement here. Those who do not trust God can only rely on themselves, but those who rely only on themselves cannot really want to have their brothers and sisters with them, right? And the world becomes a competition, a rivalry, right? Isn't this the root of all anxiety and defensiveness and antagonism and aggressiveness, right? We see the other person as a threat, right? Why? Well, we don't trust that God is at work in creation. We don't trust the process, so to speak, right? And we say, well, I got to look out for myself, and then we look over here, and hey, is this person trying to get in on something I could have, right? Is this person getting in my way, right? Or is this person out to get me, right? We start to see things in an antagonistic view. We might become defensive or aggressive, right? I can remember in my personal life, I remember one time a friend of mine was having a lot of professional success, and I was jealous. I was upset. I thought, wow, why them in some way and not me? But then all of a sudden, things kind of switched. Thank God, and I saw it differently. I noticed that, like, me and my friend, we were part of the same process. He had helped me out in my life. I had helped him out in his life, and part of the person who he was that deserved that promotion, that was because of me, right? And likewise, the person who I was and the successes that I had to do that was partially through him, right? And so I saw him again as a brother, right? I saw him as a friend, I saw this as someone who I had a relationship with, right? Not a rival. So I think we've probably all been on both sides of that equation, and that's what Lofink is saying. This is original sin, right? The basic choice to see the goodness of God, to see the goodness in others, a certain trust. So again, he's pointing out this ancestor narrative, and remember how Birch talked about the ancestor, the story of origins, right? That showed the ancient people what something really was. So this ancestor narrative works the same way, right? It's not a story about a single event that happened in the past. It's about what always happens with us, right? It's about, you could say, what always happens to us, right? It's not just, oh, this thing happened, way back at the beginning of the human species. No, the human beings fail to trust God, reject God, and try to be their own master, right? And that very thing leads us into misery, right? It goes bad, right? This happens, right? When human beings become too confident, we run into disaster. Now, remember here, God is love, right? So it's when we reject love, right? It's when we think, oh, well, no, I know a better way than to love my neighbor. Well, that's going to get us into trouble, right? Just like it got them into trouble, right? The suspicious mind, the antagonistic mindset, the mistrust, and not even giving God the time to say, well, wait a minute, God's coming down in the afternoon. Why don't we talk about it, right? Again, it's not a blind faith that Lofink is saying that the story is revealing here or calling for. No, it's a trust enough to have an intimate relationship. So as we see, us continuing to make the same mistake that's indicated in this primordial ancestor story, right? When we continue to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so to speak, right? It kind of makes you wonder, why did God create the world if we just continually mess it up and make this mistake in the first place? Or even, is there a God guiding this whole thing, right? Or at least is there a good God guiding this whole thing?